Hey, everybody. Before we begin the show, I wanted to give a shout out to our friends at POWERPOOL. POWERPOOL is a mining pool and is one of the most profitable for miners. So if you have one miner at home or a fleet of miners at scale, point your workers to POWERPOOL to enjoy the best payouts. POWERPOOL supports a number of algorithms, SHA-256 for Bitcoin, X11 for Dash, and others. And of course, we're focused and we care about the most, S-CRYPT for LITECOIN, Dogecoin, and now Bell's Coin, merge mining. Pointing your workers to POWERPOOL is easy with its simple user interface, and the platform also has all the reporting available that your operation needs. Typically, POWERPOOL extends a low 1% pool fee. However, if you register with the 84 million link in the show notes, you will lock in a sub 1% pool fee, which is excellent. So start mining with the most profitable pool in 2024 and register for POWERPOOL with the link in the show notes. Cheers, happy mining. Hello and welcome to the 84 Million Podcast. We're on episode 26, and we have a special guest with us, Mr. Dennis Porter. So what do we say about Dennis? Dennis Porter is the CEO and founder of the Satoshi Action Fund and president and founder of Satoshi Action Education. Dennis is a pioneer in blockchain advocacy, with Satoshi Action having successes in 4 states in terms of legislation passed. We're going to talk about all this today. With Satoshi Action Education, Dennis is empowering and advancing cutting-edge peer-reviewed research addressing energy, proof of work. Of course, we're concerned about that in mining. Find Dennis on X at Dennis_Porter_. So Dennis, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here, Kyle.
Very good, very good. So let's just maybe start out with basics here. Some of our guests know who you are. Definitely Bitcoiners know who you are. I think a lot of Litecoiners know who you are. Of course, you were with us at the summit just a few months ago. But you're a powerhouse for blockchain advocacy. I'm going to use this kind of language. You're a pioneer in many ways with your work with Satoshi Action and Satoshi Action Education. Before we dive into the specifics of what you're doing in legislation and modeling and all that stuff, let's rewind and what led you to the advocacy space, just generally speaking.
Yeah, it's a great question, Kyle, and I think it's important for people to realize, taking a few steps back on advocacy and politics and where we all came from. You know, today it's really exciting to see, political parties, presidential candidates endorse Bitcoin, but it just wasn't that long ago when many in the Bitcoin space and in the digital asset space writ large really feared that government would come and try to take away our Bitcoin. They would try to interfere with Bitcoin. And I was one of those people, especially in 2020 when we were in the middle of the shutdowns. There was a lot of growing concern by myself and many others that the ability to access Bitcoin would be restricted, or the Bitcoiners in the United States would be discriminated against. And so in 2022, 2021, I became very vocal about Bitcoin. I started to talk a lot about Bitcoin after having discovered in 2017. I had a pretty strong understanding of the technology. Now, of course, my understanding of Bitcoin is constantly growing and improving. But at the time, I really started to realize that we needed to do a better job of advocating for Bitcoin politically, that even though that Bitcoin and other digital assets sit outside of government, they sit outside of the physical world, and they are present in the digital realm, that we as human beings were not outside of the physical realm, and that governments across the world could potentially start discriminating against those that hold digital assets. And so I decided to get super active on Twitter and social media and on my podcast with helping to educate lawmakers about the benefits of the technology and about Bitcoin writ large, and spent a lot of time telling others that they needed to get active. But I really just didn't see anyone getting out there, securing the wins that I thought we needed to secure in order for Bitcoin to be secure and safe in the United States. I saw a lot of good, education taking place, but we needed to get policy wins on the board for Bitcoin. We needed to start showing that there was enough support for this technology, that there would be people trying to pass bills into law to protect the technology and to advance the technology. And so despite yelling into the void that was the internet for several years, I ultimately, came to the conclusion that I needed to launch something myself. And that's why in June of 2022, I launched Satoshi Action Education, and we got to work at the state level here in the United States advocating for Bitcoin. We view politics as bottom up. A lot of people view politics as a top down type of industry, and it is in fact quite the opposite. They say politics is local, and we agree with that thesis. So that's why we started to get to work at the state level advocating for Bitcoin rights, the same way that the cannabis industry started at the same state level. In 2012 they passed into law 2 bills, one in Washington and Colorado, to be able to advance the cannabis industry and decriminalize cannabis. And we took that same approach, and we started with 2 states ourselves. We started in Arkansas and in Montana. A decade later, the cannabis industry now has 75% of the country with pro-cannabis legislation on the books. And now we see a federal reaction taking place where they are trying to move cannabis down the schedule. And I think ultimately they will decriminalize cannabis here in the United States. But all of that is possible because of the work done at the state level. And we are pursuing that exact same approach. And we do believe that given enough time and runway, that we'll have the vast majority of the states on board with Bitcoin. We're already seeing great headway, not only in these red states that we've passed these laws in, but where they're also seeing some fantastic headway in some of the blue states as well. Ultimately, we believe that Bitcoin unites Americans across the political spectrum, and that our goal is by the end of 2030 for the United States to secure all the rights of Bitcoiners across the whole entire country, whether that be at the state level or at the federal level.
Very good. There's a lot there, a whole lot there. So there's an assumption kind of government that you kind of carry that led you into the space. And I think, like I said, I called you a pioneer because I don't really see anybody else doing this. Now I'm in Texas, there is a blockchain council here, and there has been some political kind of engagement here. And you've done some stuff here too, which we want to talk about in a little bit. But I think in the crypto space, a lot of us, well, at least in the old days, there was a lot of libertarian sort of things. Some were very much anarchists. There's a different, and now it's changing. Now you're seeing bipartisanship in the traditional kind of governmental structures, whether it's federal or state. But I think I just want to address maybe an argument or a criticism that, we're conceding by going to the government. In other words, we don't need permission. Bitcoin or Litecoin is totally permissionless. It's outside the scope of government. Why on earth would we go there? And I think some people, how would you address that sort of argument?
Yeah, it's a great quote that I like to recite, and it's, you might not be politics. You might not be interested in politics. You might not be interested in government, but government is certainly interested in you. And if you don't get active to defend your rights, someone is going to come and take them away from you. And so again, Bitcoin and digital assets like Litecoin, completely outside of government from the sense that they operate in a different environment, in a different realm. But you and me and the other people that are listening to this podcast are not. And we are beholden to the rules and the laws of governments, whether we like it or not. And so if you don't want to be ruled by bad laws and bad regulations, you need to get active. And if you don't get active and you don't pursue your responsibility to be able to shape the country the way that you think it should be run and the way that you should be governed, you're doomed to be ran and governed by people that think the opposite of you and that oppose you and that oppose your values and oppose what you want to see happen. So I try to tell this to this is a big problem in the Bitcoin space. People think we should stay away from government. We should stay outside government. This is a huge mistake that the tech industry made in the 90s. They tried to stay outside of government. Well, guess what? Now they're completely co-opted by the government. The tech is littered with backdoors that the government has created. So I really think that people need to understand the implications of what's taking place here. We still live inside what they call the meat space, the real world. We need to recognize that and start fighting to defend our rights. Now, people often say, I don't like laws, I don't like regulations, let's get rid of them all. Sometimes people need to understand that rules and regulations are not just for restricting human beings and human activity. They can also be used to restrict government activity. The Bill of Rights, the Constitution is filled with government regulations that regulate the government. The reason that you have the freedom of speech, even though it's a natural born right, the reason that it's protected is because of regulations, because of the U.S. Constitution. The reason that you have the freedom to vote, the reason that you have the freedom to worship whoever you want, to be whatever part of whatever political party that you want, is because of those protections that are within the U.S. Constitution. Now, I know they're natural born rights, but the reason that they exist and are protected by the legal system is because very early on, the founders realized and were very intelligent in understanding that we need to protect these rights in law. We need to codify them in law. That's what we're doing at Satoshi Action. We are codifying your rights to access Bitcoin into law at the state level and eventually at the federal level.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And here. And I think you're doing the right thing because, and obviously there's a response. You are doing the right thing and things are moving forward in a positive way. But this idea that I think we've become very passive maybe in modern times when our ancestors didn't always have those luxuries. And, we're not as involved as maybe we could be. And you're very involved. And I think you're an example to get involved and see what happens. Because how are we supposed to have a representative government when we're not involved? I mean, how are we supposed to expect a legislator at the state or federal level to respond to an issue that we care about if we never tell them about it or demand it? I mean, the old days was demanding and forcing them to do, the will of the people, right? So I think the further we get away from influencing or shaping government, going to them and saying, this is what I want my government to look like, it will be formed for us. And I think that's a big case. And I think more of it needs to happen. So again, you're a pioneer in this, and I thank you. Now, our European friends, this does apply to you to a degree. You have a different shape of government. I do not live in Europe or East Asia or wherever you may listen to this podcast, but you still have governments, you still have people around you, and those people can be communicated with. And you mentioned earlier about localism or something along those lines, being more responsive. And I think that is a huge part of this. So it seems you're more confident in the state level at this time. Not saying you're turning your eyes and ears away from the federal level, but you seem to be very specific on state actions here in the United States, or the 10th Amendment. So what's inspiring that?
Well, I mean, the United States, before it existed, it was a body of states, and the federal government is essentially a division of those states. The states got together and decided to create the federal government. And so, in my opinion, from very early on, the U.S. has really been all about the states and all about bringing the states together. And we also see, despite how powerful the federal government has become, we see a lot of opportunity to advance issues at the state level. Everything from a women's right to vote, to same-sex marriage, to the ongoing battle for cannabis to be able to be legalized here in the United States. All of these issues started at the state level. And eventually, once they created enough momentum and positive momentum, they are able to pass legislation at the federal level. Of course, we're still waiting for that on the cannabis side, but there is current legislation, active legislation, where they are trying to bring cannabis down the schedule. And I believe in the future they will fully legalize cannabis here in the United States because of that state level work. Additionally, there's been a lot of studies, including a Bloomberg study that was done, that says when there's a flurry of activity at the state level, it creates a momentum and we see a federal reaction. That, again, has happened for every single one of these issues, including even the civil rights movement, which started at the state level. So major movements where we are working to protect rights of people and individuals and groups have started at the state level. Everything from women's rights to vote, civil rights movement, to the Bitcoin rights that we're fighting for today. And we believe that by just waiting around and sitting around for Washington, D.C. to do something, that we are wasting valuable time that we could be using to generate the momentum necessary to see real change here in America. That's why we're going to continue to fight at the state level. We often say at Satoshi Action, the states will lead, they have led, and they will continue to lead.
Here, that's federalism. So we'll move to the recent kind of accomplishment. House Bill 2481 in Pennsylvania, my home state, or state of birth, I should say. So pretty neat to see that. I still have family there. But kind of tell us what happened in Pennsylvania. What was the bill that was passed in the lower chamber, of the Commonwealth? And how did you even get that momentum to get it passed in the House in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, it was a really big win in Pennsylvania. We're very excited about the fact that this got across the finish line in the House. In most states, they are part-time legislators, so they only legislate from, January to May at the latest. And some states, they only meet every other year. Texas meets every other year. Mm-hmm. And then Montana meets every other year. There are other states that meet every other year, or they have short sessions every other year and long sessions every other year. Regardless, most of them are done by summertime. Yep. And the state of Pennsylvania happens to be a year-round legislature, which is why we've been continuing to work with that state, continuing to work with Representative Cabell there in the state to continue to move this legislation forward. And we were able to get it to break free at the last minute. Earlier this month, we were able to get it through committee, which means that it went for a committee vote. It passed favorably through the committee and eventually made it to the House floor, where it was able to be voted on, and we received a wide bipartisan majority support for the bill. 75 Democrats and 100 Republicans voted in favor of that legislation. And it was a big win, and obviously has election impacts because this is the most important state in the presidential election which is evident by just the insane amount of money that is being spent there. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent by both sides in order to be able to win the Keystone State, I should say, of Pennsylvania, where they have 19 critical electoral votes. For those that might be outside the United States, the Electoral College it's very different from a popular vote. You don't need to win the popular vote to win the presidency here in the United States. You just need to get to 270. And there are very few states that actually switch back and forth between the different presidential candidates. We call them swing states. Pennsylvania is one of those swing states. There are other swing states. Sometimes the swing states change over time, like Ohio and Florida have both stopped really being swing states in the near term. They're really solidly in the red over the last couple of years, but states like Pennsylvania, states like North Carolina, these are key swing states. And so what happens is you get close to the 2024 or any presidential election, and you'll start to see a huge investment of time and resources into these states. And that's why we thought it was really interesting as this started to break free. We wanted to see, wow, 10 days out from the election, could we be making progress for Bitcoin in one of the most important swing states, in one of the most critical presidential elections of our lifetime? And we were able to do that. And the way that this impacts the presidential race is it really shows that both sides of the aisle are favorable towards this technology, and it gives both sides of the aisle the opportunity to talk further about Bitcoin in the middle of this election, where Bitcoin is slowly but surely becoming a kitchen table issue for a lot of households. Now, it's not a kitchen table issue for all households. 1 in 7 Americans own Bitcoin, which is a huge number, a huge increase from previous years. And so as time goes on, it's going to become more and more important. And in this keystone state, in the key state of Pennsylvania, we're seeing Bitcoin rights progress. And that is going to show to a lot of the voters there that they have decisions to make about who they're going to elect, not only at the presidential level, but all the way down to the state level. And now they're given the opportunity to see who voted favorably for this legislation and who voted against this legislation. That is going to be helpful for making decisions here in this election. It will also be helpful for making decisions in the future. We've talked to a lot of folks that work at the federal level when it comes to elections, and they have said time and time again that they look to see how candidates voted on our legislation before they endorse them, whether it be a PAC, super PAC, or a political action committee, or any other type of group that is spending money in these elections. When a lower candidate, let's say a state rep, runs for a congressional seat, and they are running and they're trying to secure the crypto vote writ large, they look to see how they voted on our legislation. So our legislation is becoming a beacon for how to vote, not only in this election, but for many elections to come.
Very good. House Bill 2481, it's also called the Digital Assets Authorization Act. The good news is, if anybody wants to read this, it's like 4 pages long. That's how all legislation should be. Some federal folks tried to push for that over the past few years. I would say Massey and Rand Paul and things. But it's easily understandable. So just give us a synopsis of kind of what this bill accomplishes. Should the Pennsylvania Senate hand it to the governor and he sign it?
The most important part of this legislation, by far and away, is the protection for self-custody. Self-custody is, in my opinion, the linchpin for ensuring that we can be in a Bitcoin future or not. Because if you cannot hold Bitcoin, if you cannot truly possess the Bitcoin that you have and transact with the Bitcoin that you have, then you've never really left the old system behind. You're still in the old system, and we're still trapped by some of the major problems that the old system brings to us in society. So the protection for self-custody is in there. Your right to self-custody is in there. Your right to run a node, which is also a critical component, because if we can't run our own nodes, how are we supposed to be able to control the future of our own Bitcoin journey? I want to make sure that my node is protected and your node is protected, regardless of whether you're running Bitcoin or anything else. You need to make sure that these nodes are protected. Additionally, the ability to buy, sell, trade Bitcoin and other digital assets is protected. We want to make sure that people can engage in commerce with Bitcoin. And then the last one, which is important here, is that there's no new taxes on Bitcoin when used as a form of payment. So to really put this into context, any other taxes that apply still apply. You just can't discriminate. You can't say, well, I'll take your cash, I'll take your dollars, but if you're going to pay in Bitcoin, it's going to be a 2% tax. We don't want to see these types of taxes. That'd be a really limiting factor on the ability to use digital assets in the economy. And so we ban all additional taxes, no new taxes on Bitcoin.
Very, very good. And I think that the taxation thing is gigantic, and at least you're limiting it with this, which is a great thing. And I think in the future we'll have to address, hopefully we can roll more of that back, treat it as a currency that it is. Bitcoin is a currency, Litecoin is a currency, and currencies are non-taxed. And I think that's the biggest kind of thumb on them and their, use and expansion is that tax structure at the federal level. But that'll be another issue, and that'll be a big one to fight that. Maybe you'll be the one pulling that up. That would be great. But either way, that's no small thing. But what you're doing is terrific, and the states will lead. That's what you're saying. The states will lead, and now Pennsylvania is involved in doing these sorts of things, which is the fifth state. Is that correct?
So we have passed these bills into law, fully signed by those governors in 4 different states. We've done that in 4 states. This would be not the 5th state to make movement in a chamber, because we have had other states where we made movement in the chamber, but we weren't able to get it across the finish line before the deadline. So if this bill passed into law by Senate, signed by the governor, then yes, it would be the 5th bill that we have passed to protect the rights of Bitcoiners.
Very good. So if you're listening in Pennsylvania, you can specifically act on this and specifically contact those who represent you in regards to House Bill 2481. I don't know what the Senate companion bill is called, but that would be the next one in line. And of course, you can contact the governor on that too, to push his office or make them aware of the things that are happening and request that he sign it.
We'll actually, on that note, have a big post-election campaign to drive the Senate to come and reconvene to be able to see this bill. We need to get the Senate to come back after the election in a lame duck session to pass this legislation out of the Senate and send it to the governor, where we believe the governor will sign it into law if it is passed in the Senate. So if you are looking for a way to engage on this, certainly wait till after the election. You know, the big problem with the election is a lot of these folks are running right now, and they want to make sure they can win, or their colleagues are running and they want to make sure they can win. So there's not going to be a lot of bandwidth for this type of policy movement between now and election time. So as soon as the election ends, we'll be gearing up to drive the advocacy campaign to have Bitcoiners and those in the digital asset space write letters to their representatives there in the state. I will say additionally that we did do one before. After it got out of committee, the bill was able to make it through committee. We pushed those advocates to reach out to lawmakers to be able to have them write letters, and we were able to get over 2,000 letters within a 24-hour period to be sent to those Republican leaders there in the state that we needed to be able to get on board to move this legislation forward. We were able to do that and then pass it through the House. We hope to do the same thing on the Senate side.
Very, very good. Curious about this legislation. It's a model legislation, so I imagine you're modifying the language per each state that it's being introduced in. Do you have other bills too, or is this primarily what you're using, a single kind of bill vehicle, or do you have multiple vehicles? Because I understand this addresses kind of a lot of things, even in the 4 pages. But do you have one model that you expand, or do you have multiple versions of legislation that you promote, or how does that work?
It's a great question, Kyle. We have multiple pieces of legislation. This is our flagship piece of legislation that we use to protect rights of Bitcoiners and those in the digital asset space. So people will often see this legislation being spoken about and pushed forward the most. We've had it introduced in over 16 states and passed into law in 4 different. And of course, they are, yes, as you sort of smartly guessed, there are different variations of this legislation. So we have legislation that is strictly about protecting the right to mine that we passed in the first 2 states. And then we expanded the legislation to protect self-custody and mining. But then we restricted this one back down for Pennsylvania to just focus on the usage of Bitcoin. We did not feel in this legislative cycle that we could get a Bitcoin mining bill passed through in Pennsylvania. So we focused on the areas that we could win. I'm a very big fan of the Ronald Reagan quote where it says, "Come for half the loaf and come back for the other half." So that's kind of how we operate. We want to make sure that we are securing wins and not just getting legislation introduced. We actually want to get it across the finish line. And once we do, of course, we'll come back for those other parts that we felt were more difficult to pass. That's just a lesson that I think a lot of people have learned in the advocacy space. It's a lesson that we've also learned ourselves. And so even as time goes on, we may even change that strategy. We may be splitting right to mine from, right to self-custody bills to separate the mining and energy usage concerns away from what might be some monetary concerns that people have. That way it gives both bills a better chance to win, less concern in each bill. You want to reduce the concern by lawmakers. You want to make lawmakers feel confident about each individual piece of legislation. And whenever you do these, mega bills, you create a lot of attack vectors for the legislation. So we'll probably be separating them as time goes on to ensure their survival. But this is not the only type of legislation that we try to pass. We're also working very diligently to be able to help state pensions and treasurers and the people that control those pensions, those pension fund managers, and the people that are managing the assets of the state to study Bitcoin. We did that in 2024 legislative cycle. Moving forward in 2025 legislative cycle, we will have legislation that actually allows the state to invest into Bitcoin directly. So that is going to be a very interesting big next move for us And beyond that, we're also working diligently to be able to suppress choke point 2.0. We believe there is a state solution to ending choke point 2.0. We are pursuing it. It is fully funded, and we will be developing. That will be a developing story as time goes on, but you will see some pretty big news on that in 2025 if we are able to be successful.
Tell us about choke point 2.0.
Choke point 2.0 is essentially a form of discrimination that has taken place in the United States where Bitcoin companies, digital asset companies, crypto companies writ large have been discriminated against, and they have been pushed out of the traditional financial sector. They've been unable to secure traditional banking. So when I say traditional banking too, I just mean the ability to access a bank account so that they can pay their employees, they can pay their power bill if they're a Bitcoin miner. And across the entire country, banks have been pushing out customers that are in the Bitcoin ecosystem, the digital asset ecosystem, because of the fact that they are engaged in that industry. That form of discrimination predominantly takes place because of the three regulatory bodies at the federal level. You have the FDIC, the OCC, and the Federal Reserve. These are the three banking regulators at the federal government level, and they have, in a various different types of ways, pushed Bitcoin companies out of banks that operate under their regulatory purview. So what we want to do is create a state solution where there's not the ability for the OCC, the FDIC, or the Federal Reserve to discriminate against Bitcoin companies. We want to make sure that Bitcoin companies can have access to traditional banking. And I know that a lot of people say, well, aren't you supposed to be unbanked when you're in the Bitcoin space? Listen, I believe the future is a future where, in 10, 20, 30 years, people could operate outside of the financial system completely if they so chose. But today we don't live in that environment. We live in a world where you still need to have access to traditional banking in order to pay your employees, pay for your electrical bill from your power provider. They're not going to accept Bitcoin at this point. I think they will in the future. So in the near term, we need to eliminate this type of discrimination to ensure that Bitcoin companies can thrive here in the United States.
And so you have addressed that with legislation, or you're looking to, because that's excellent.
Yes, we are in the process of addressing this situation.
Very, very good. Yeah, I mean, people need liquidity too. So if you're a miner and you need to offset your power with dollars, you need to sell a portion of your Bitcoin or Litecoin or whatever you're mining to pay that bill, at least for now. I like that optimism as well, that we might be paying these things down the road in the native currency. But very good. Tell us about your mining efforts then, because that's huge. The user side is I'm operating with these blockchain currencies, but many are not mining. Some do, and we need miners. But maybe tell us why that's important to be protecting miners specifically at the state level.
Well, listen, when I first found Bitcoin in 2017, one of the very first things that I did was I started to mine Bitcoin in my basement. I got up to about roughly 20 S9s that I was down there with, and I had to figure out a lot of different ways to keep the heat out, to keep them cool, to reduce the noise. I was in the middle of a very suburban area where there's a lot of houses around me. I also had to figure out how to reduce my energy prices to increase my profit margin. So all along that way, as I was tinkering around with the firmware, the software, and negotiating with my power company, trying to figure out how to innovate and to be able to reduce the noise and reduce the heat, I realized that the technology was having this impact on me where it was driving me to innovate. I was constantly driven to innovate with Bitcoin mining. And I thought to myself, well, if this is happening to me, it must be happening to others. And so I've just always had a very long love of Bitcoin mining ever since I found Bitcoin in 2017. But then I've gone on to appreciate Bitcoin mining for so much more than just its ability to drive others to innovate. We have since discovered that Bitcoin mining is a powerful tool for balancing the grid. It is an extremely useful tool for mitigating methane emissions and for enhancing renewable energy and for creating rural jobs and for driving our economy forward. So I continue to advocate for Bitcoin mining, not only because I have a deep passion for the technology, but also because I believe that it has a lot of benefits that I can offer to society. And those benefits are benefits that lawmakers understand and want and know that they want and need, including the ability to balance the grid. In the case of Texas, and I tell this story all the time, there was a huge winter storm. Winter Storm Uri came down, smashed into the Texas grid in 2021, and it brought billions of dollars of damages and 700 plus deaths, maybe much more because of that storm, and they weren't prepared for it. Well, a little while later, a lot of the Bitcoin mining flooded into Texas for a variety of reasons, and then another winter storm hit, Winter Storm Elliott. Winter Storm Elliott hit Texas the same way Winter Storm Uri did, but the Texas energy grid, the ERCOT energy operators, had another tool in their toolbox, and that was Bitcoin mining. During that storm, 1,700 megawatts of power wound down and delivered its energy back to the grid in order for ratepayers, people that wanted to keep their homes warm, hospitals trying to stay energized were able to do so because those miners wound down. They delivered 1,700 megawatts of power, which is a non-trivial amount of energy. To put it into context, 1,700 megawatts of power is enough energy to heat 1.7 million small homes. It's enough energy to energize 320 large hospitals. It is an incredible amount of energy that was made available right in the middle of when everyone else was seeking to keep their homes warm so they could stay alive. Those Bitcoin miners were the first line of defense. And that's just one way that Bitcoin mining is extremely powerful for enhancing our energy systems. And that's why I push hard. And it was the first legislation we ever crafted to defend Bitcoin mining and to ensure that Americans can benefit from this technology, which at the time, many had viewed as just a net negative. Now, many in the space, including the energy space and the political space, are starting to understand the true power of Bitcoin mining.
So that's incredible. A neat story about Texas too, because that's where we're based. I know people are harnessing even, I should say, old, no longer used kind of access, or how do I say it? Oil sources that are just kind of far away from, not even close to anything. And they're building on top of that, mining, and they're capturing that energy that would otherwise not even be used. So there's a lot of creative ways that these miners are finding energy that's there but not being used and utilizing it to secure the network, mine new Bitcoin, of course, per the halving cycles. But it's incredible. What I wanted to say is there's a lot of FUD with the use of energy for Bitcoin. I mean, it's most major networks, if you're going to hear anything about it, whether it's Bill Mayer or whatever, they're going to be talking about it negatively. Do you see that changing? It sounds like yes. And what are you seeing more along the lines that this FUD is really being debunked through Bitcoin mining and how energy is being used for Bitcoin and Litecoin and blockchain?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're going to continue to see, I think for some time, maybe several years, continued negative perceptions of Bitcoin mining. It's very easy to attack any large user of power, especially for someone who might be concerned about the climate, someone who might be concerned about the environment. But if you are truly concerned about the climate and you are concerned about the environment, you should be a big, big fan of Bitcoin mining. Ultimately, Bitcoin mining is a tool for you to achieve your energy goals and your environmental goals, whatever they may be. Now, certainly, if you don't care about the environment, you could go plug a Bitcoin mine into a coal plant and you could mine off that coal plant and have a net negative impact on the climate. But if you care about the climate and you care about making sure that we reduce our carbon emissions, Bitcoin mining is one of the most powerful tools for helping to achieve that. And this is not just claims that we make on podcasts. This is not just claims that we talk about in blogs. We have been able to back up these types of claims with credible, evidence-backed, peer-reviewed research, which shows that Bitcoin mining is an extremely powerful tool for balancing the grid, enhancing renewable energy, and mitigating methane emissions. And so that's why I think it's so important to be able to produce this type of research, because oftentimes people say, oh, you're just trying to whitewash the space, or greenwash the space, I should say. You're just trying to greenwash the space. You're just trying to make up these claims to be able to protect Bitcoin mining. But we have been able to actually produce peer-reviewed research, and even peer-reviewed research in top 2% journals, which have backed up these claims that we have made, because many of us in the space, we see it anecdotally. We know that it's true. We see the way that Bitcoin mining is balancing the grid. We see how Bitcoin mining is enhancing clean energy. But it's important for those, and I think in the academic space, in the media space, and in the policy space, to have those claims backed up forcefully by peer-reviewed research. We've been able to produce a number of pieces of peer-reviewed research, everything from our most recent paper, where we were able to say that Bitcoin mining is a powerful tool for mitigating methane emissions from landfills, to helping others across the world be able to produce research that shows that clean energy sources like wind and solar greatly benefit from things like Bitcoin mining, because Bitcoin mining is a variable energy demand source, and you have these variable energy resources like wind and solar, which only generate power when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining. Well, they need a partner on the grid, because if you don't have a constant form of generation, like gas, coal, nuclear, hydro, these are all on-demand power sources. They can produce power pretty much whenever you want it or whenever you need it. They're called baseload power energy resources. So if you don't have that consistent supply that's being generated, you need to have a partner on the grid that can help to be able to fix this variance that you have from wind and solar. Previously, before Bitcoin mining existed, the absolute best way to do that was through peaker plants. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but for every time that you build a large amount of wind and solar, which are carbon free, you have to build very carbon intensive, very expensive peaker plants to be able to supplant those types of resources that you've built. So now instead, you can have Bitcoin mining come in, which is a totally carbon free, just using electricity way to balance the grid and to be able to enhance things like wind and solar.
And the balancing is pretty significant. And there will be some sort of agreement between, like, for example, ERCOT and mining. I'm sure there's a program where they're communicating the needs, and miners are voluntarily depowering their rigs for a period of time to benefit their neighbors, which is pretty incredible and pretty generous, if you ask me. Not everybody turns their business off for good cause, but they do for a period of time. So that's actually pretty significant. And I'll leave it at that. But very good. This is all exciting stuff that you're working on, that you've done, that you're doing. And I think it is a testament about, getting with who's around you and changing things. Of course, we're both on X, and we can just sit there, and I wonder how functional that is, So go out in the world and move these issues in real time. And I'm sure it's difficult. I spent a little bit of time in Washington, and I know how difficult it is to get into offices and get the attention of these representatives. How's your approach to actually getting your meetings and successfully communicating your ideas when you might only have 4 seconds, it feels like, to communicate that idea?
Yeah, the 4 seconds, we call it our opportunity to microdose lawmakers, because we certainly don't have very much time to completely orange pill them, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The great thing about living in the United States is that we live in a representative democracy, and so we're able to reach out to these lawmakers and request meetings. And also, because of the nature of the state activity that we pursue, we're able to reach out to a lot of different lawmakers in a lot of different states. So we have a lot of bites at the apple, so to speak, to be able to have these meetings and be able to have them put ourselves in a position to be able to educate on Bitcoin. So every time we educate on Bitcoin with lawmakers, we always want to provide a solution. I think this is where a lot of advocacy groups go wrong. They say, oh, let's just focus on education. Let's not lobby. Let's just talk to them about Bitcoin. I think that's really the wrong approach. The right approach is to use both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. So you want to educate on Bitcoin, the benefits of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, and then you turn around and as soon as this happens every single time. We don't even have to ask them. They say, oh, well, now that I like Bitcoin, what should I do? What's the solution? And we go, great, we have the solution. We have the model policy for you. And this is the legislation that you can pass into law to make sure that your jurisdiction is a leader on the technology.
Very good. And is what people in these states, these legislators, are they most attracted to? The grid balancing, the methane capture?
Absolutely.
Because they might not care very much. I mean, they need to care about nodes, and they're learning to care about nodes. But I'm curious what's attracting them about these technologies when you present it to them.
Yeah, so definitely the grid balancing component of Bitcoin mining is very important for lawmakers, regulators. They love that component. It's very easy to pitch. They can understand it really well. Same thing with enhancing clean energy. They love it. Same thing with methane mitigation and job creation in rural parts of the state. The best part about this technology is that the benefits it provides are all things that lawmakers know that they want. And so as soon as we help them understand that Bitcoin helps them achieve things that they already know they want, then they are, very positive in passing legislation to be able to get it across the finish line so that they can receive these types of benefits.
Very good. Encouraging stuff. And speaking of Texas, I know Texas did create I'll call it a working group or some sort of committee that does study Bitcoin and blockchain. And were you involved in that?
So I was not involved. I was not involved in that. Texas, unfortunately, has a very, very, very strong group that is led there by Lee Bratcher, the Texas Blockchain Council.
Yes.
They do a lot of great stuff.
Yes,
Large flexible load was created in ERCOT. They do a lot of great stuff there as well. So I'm a big fan of the work that's happened there. We do occasionally come to help when the bat signal is put out. In 2020, what was it, 3? We went there to help fight against SB 1751, which was a bill to be able to try to kill, essentially try to kill Bitcoin mining. What it would have done is eliminated the ability for Bitcoin mining to participate in ancillary services markets over 10% of the market. And it would have also restricted their ability to access tax abatements, which is essentially like, if you build a giant billion-dollar facility in the middle of rural Texas, instead of having your property taxes increase immediately, there's just a delayed effect. So it's not like you're getting a tax break. You're just essentially saying, well, I'm not going to increase your taxes right away as a way to lure you into these rural parts of the state, which is really one of the only tools that a lot of these rural communities have to be able to draw business to their area. And so they wanted to, the Texas legislature some folks there wanted to restrict the access of Bitcoin mining to participate in those tax abatement programs and also the grid balancing programs, which ultimately we believe was an effort that was done by other industry participants in the state, other groups that have a lot to benefit by restricting Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining is one of the best grid balancing technologies on the planet. When Bitcoin mining is balancing the grid, the other resources, the other types of grid balancing technologies, they lose out. And so because of the fact that Bitcoin mining has been doing such a good job of eating up that market, the end result for a lot of these companies is not, oh, well, let's innovate, let's do Bitcoin mining ourselves. They said, well, let's use the long arm of the government to restrict the ability for Bitcoin miners to participate in these programs. We killed that bill in 2023, but I 100% can guarantee you there is going to be a second attempt to come after Bitcoin mining in the 2025 legislative cycle, which will actually be led by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. It's very unfortunate to see him take a negative turn towards Bitcoin mining, but he will be leading an effort to suppress Bitcoin mining in the state. The TBC will be there to fight, and we'll be there to fight alongside them.
Mm-hmm. Noted. Yeah, I was aware of that bill. Any I guess you may have already answered this. So nothing specific that you're working on in Texas now. Are you mostly looking at the Pennsylvania arena, or where else are you currently working in 2024?
What we try to do is, we try to go where there is the best opportunity for us to have the most amount of success in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of resources in places where there isn't already a well-established partner. So Texas Blockchain is a well-established partner. We try to work through them, not around them, when it comes to Texas, but a lot of the states, they don't have these well-established they don't have these well-established blockchain groups like how Texas does. Some states do, but Texas is by far and away the biggest example of success. It really comes down to the size of the economy, the amount of miners there, so they're able to fund that operation there pretty effectively. But a lot of states just don't have those resources. And so what we do is we try to figure out which states we can have victories in for Bitcoin and for Bitcoin mining in. And we do that through a series of different data points. It can be, did we find a lawmaker that appreciates the technology? Is there an interest in, bringing Bitcoin or Bitcoin mining to the state? How likely are we to be able to pass this legislation into law? We take into a lot of things into consideration. A clear example of a state that we would not operate in the short term is California. California is huge, vast, expensive, very difficult to pass legislation there. There's already sort of an anti-Bitcoin sentiment, although I think it's shifting. And so over time, we may come to the state, but it just requires so many more resources to be active there. I mean, operating in California is like operating in DC. It's just a lot of competing interests. I think California is like the 5th largest economy in the world, so much more difficult to compete in when it comes to legislation. So we try to go where there is low-hanging fruit and to get those wins, but also to build that momentum for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. And that has so far meant states like Oklahoma, Montana, Arkansas, and Louisiana. We've also had really good success, although we didn't get the final win. In states like Idaho, we had great success. In states like North Carolina, we've also had great success in Missouri as well. So there's a number of other states where we've been active in. In fact, we've been active in over 20 states so far, but we just haven't seen the legislation get across the finish line. Most states, it's a 2-year effort. In fact, Oklahoma was a 2-year effort. We invested in year 1 in the 2023 legislative cycle, and we came back for the victory in 2024. We'll be doing that in a lot of other states in the 2025 legislative cycle.
Very good. The states will lead, and it looks like the heartland will lead the states, and that's great. So let it happen. I want to move to maybe
the so-called flyover country, right? I mean, the so-called flyover country has the most to benefit from this technology because they have been really left out from the tech boom, but yet they have this huge opportunity to benefit from Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining because Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining are very location agnostic. Bitcoin mining businesses can be anywhere. It's a global business. So these smaller states have a lot of opportunity due to not only their missing out on this tech boom, but also their ability to be nimble to attract this Bitcoin industry, the digital asset industry. So flyover country, if you're listening, Bitcoin is you certainly can be the first mover among the states. That's for sure.
Very good. I wanted to talk about grassroots, and then I'll move to coalitions, and we can probably land the plane there. But you're Dennis Porter. You've set up this organization. You're traveling. You've had multiple airport visits, which we briefly discussed before we went on air here. Countless time in the air. You're going around doing things. You're moving what is movable, and we thank you for it. But what do we do if we're not in your shoes? We don't have the resources of Satoshi Action behind us. How do we, on the ground, affect change, partner with you, get these things done where we live?
It's a great question. We often get people reaching out, asking us how they can help. And for those of you that reach out, I try to answer all my DMs. I definitely see them all. So thank you for those that reach out with words of encouragement and support. And for those that, want to help, the best way that you can do that is keep an eye out for our advocacy campaigns that we roll out. So we have an advocacy campaign where we'll ask advocates, such as the people listening to the show, to write letters to lawmakers to show up for volunteer days. We had at one point over a dozen, I think it was 24 Bitcoiners show up to hand out Bitcoin books to every single legislator in Washington, D.C. So every office, all 538 offices, received a Bitcoin book. Actually, some of them received multiple Bitcoin books, and we did it by hand. So that was a really cool way to participate. Now, if you are saying, I'm too busy, my work is too hard, but I have some resources that I'd love to direct, we would love to speak to potential donors. We have a wide range of donors, everything from Bitcoin mining companies to exchanges, to individuals that just deeply care about Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining that donate to Satoshi Action. We have monthly donors. We have folks that just cut a big check every once in a while. Even if it's just $5, it makes a huge difference for us as we advocate for Bitcoin. So you can go to satoshiaction.io, and there are multiple ways to donate. You can donate in Bitcoin, you can donate in dollars, and we happily hold as much of the Bitcoin as we can. In fact, we're very big on holding the Bitcoin as long as we can on our balance sheet to be able to generate, sort of benefit from the upward momentum of Bitcoin, something that we're certainly benefiting from today as we witness that Bitcoin is about to break all-time highs at $73,000.
Yep, we will see where it goes. Coalitions, I think, are important, and I think all politics seems to be based on coalitions. People that are disagreeing, getting together on shared incentives or aligned incentives. They get together, they work together, they cross the aisle, whatever language you want to use, and things can happen. We can get House bills passed in the states or even at the federal level. But I think it's extremely difficult sometimes with crypto tribalism. And I think that's deleterious to our efforts and advancements forward. So you're an example of not doing this. I mean, you're a Bitcoiner. You're on a LITECOIN podcast. You're at our LITECOIN summit over the summer, and we hope to see you again. I know you've been part of the proof of work summits over in the European kind of arena with Ethereum Classic, Bitcoin, LITECOIN, all these proof of work sort of protocols getting together. I think that's the beauty and the diplomacy of the space. And yet it seems to be almost gone in some communities that you look into. So how do you build coalitions successfully, and how do you see that we benefit from coalitions?
Yeah, diplomacy is certainly a lost art form in this modern era that we live in. We live in a more politically divisive time than ever before. Not only, I think, in the real world when it comes to politics, we see that attacking your opponent and even lying about your opponent is more effective than telling the truth and trying to bridge the divide or bridge the gap. It's an unfortunate time that we live in. And we see the same thing happening in the crypto space as well, where, we will even attack each other, then even if that hurts our own ability to be successful. And I think that that's just very short-sighted. I'm a Bitcoin only guy. I've only been invested in Bitcoin since 2017. I'm not interested in other crypto technologies, but I'm also not going to what do you call it? Cut my nose off to spite my face. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to make sure that I protect the rights of Bitcoin. And at times that can mean having tech neutral policy, which is the way we approach our policy. All of our policy is tech neutral. We do it for Bitcoin at Satoshi Action, but at the end of the day, every digital asset in this ecosystem benefits. I think something that's also important to keep in mind is, people want this Bitcoin only policy. They want me to write it all the time. And I would love to. I'm a Bitcoin only guy, right? But that's just not the way the policy works. Also in the future, let's say the government decides that the Bitcoin that you and I believe is Bitcoin today, tomorrow they say, well, that's not really Bitcoin. And then all of a sudden the legislation doesn't apply. So we think broad application of policy that protects the right to self-custody, protects the right to mine, protects the right to run a node, protects the right to buy, sell, trade Bitcoin and digital assets is the right approach, because it's the approach that will stand the test of time.
Got it. Very good. Well, Dennis, I don't have anything more for you. I appreciate your time. You're very knowledgeable. You're getting things done in the world. So I think you're an inspiration to us. I hope some folks listening here can partner with you in what you're doing. I look forward to seeing you in the future at future crypto events, and keep doing the Lord's work, I guess. Do you have any final thoughts to end the show with?
My final thought is just in the same vein as what we've talked about before. If you aren't interested in politics, you're not interested in government, if you don't see yourself jumping in as an advocate, but and you can see that there is some value to the things that I've said, I would say find a group, whether it be me, whether it be the Texas Blockchain Council, whether it be any other group that's having success in this space. And I would say definitely check to make sure that they've had success, because there are some groups in this space who are, taking money and they sort of light it on fire. But if there are groups that you can show that they have proof of work, what was the real results that they've been able to produce? For us, it's passing legislation, it's killing bad legislation, it's getting peer-reviewed research. These are undeniable pieces of proof of work. Seek that proof of work out from a group that you like and go and fund them as much as you possibly can, because a lot of those political groups, there's just no other way to generate revenue for themselves. They really depend on the gracious offers of their donors that invest into them.
Okay, well, folks, again, follow Dennis on X at Dennis _Porter_. Of course, visit SatoshiAction.io. Also on X, we can find Satoshi Action Fund. That's the username, and Satoshi Educate is the kind of the platform where he's putting out the peer-reviewed research. So check all those out, follow him, and I think when we work together, whether you're a SHA miner or a SCRYPT miner, we're functioning on the same principles, and together we're stronger. So again, I thank you, Dennis, for what you're doing, and we'll leave it at that. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Kyle. Looking forward to the next one.